Over the last century, we've seen phenomenal breakthroughs that have resulted in the extension in our lifespan. And yet we've not really been able to conquer the one condition that causes our bodies to break down: age. So life expectancy has dramatically increased. And when we speak about longevity, we speak about health spans.
العمر الزمني هو قياس للمدة الزمنية اللي يعيشها الفرد، ولكن العمر البيولوجي هو المدة المتوقعة أن يعيشها هذا الفرد ومدى احتمالية إصابته بالأمراض. من الناحية الجينية، العمر البيولوجي مرتبط بما يسمى طول التيلومير، والتيلومير هو موجود في نهاية الكروموسومات في تركيبتنا الوراثية. وعدة دراسات أثبتت أن هناك عديد من العوامل البيئية تأثر على طول التيلومير، مثل هالعوامل البيئية ما نحصل عليه من تغذيتنا بشكل يومي.
علاماتنا الوراثية تحدد قابليتنا الجينية للأمراض، لكن لا تحدد مصيرنا، وإنما هو خيارنا حتى وإن كانت شديدة الخطورة. من خلال علاماتنا الوراثية يمكننا تحسين جودة حياتنا وإضافة حياة لأيام القادمة. يمكننا تبني نمط حياة صحي وسليم بعيداً عن المؤثرات والآفات.
الإمارات أطلقت المشروع الجينوم الإماراتي، وهدف الدراسة هو فهم التباين الجيني أو الاختلافات الجينية بين سكان دولة الإمارات، واستخدام هذه المعلومات للوصول للتشخيص دقيق والعلاج الدقيق اللي هو البيرسوناليزد ميديسن، اللي عن طريقه قدرنا نعالج أمراض معينة بناء على التركيبة الجينية، مثل علاج سيولة الدم، أو في مرض السرطان استخدام عقارات كيماوية لجينات محددة بأضرار جانبية أقل.
By focusing our healthcare compass in the direction of longevity, the UAE is going to set an example of not just how to have longer, healthier lives, but these longer, healthier lives are going to contribute positively to the economy. They're going to raise the GDP, they're going to raise demand, and they will reduce the burden on the healthcare infrastructure in the country.
المعدة بيت الداء والحمية رأس الدواء، فعلى الجميع المحافظة على صحتهم طوال حياتهم باتباع نظام غذائي صحي وممارسة الرياضة وأخذ القسط الكافي من النوم، وأيضاً اختيار المكان المناسب للعمل وأيضاً السكن، لأن الصحة النفسية تؤثر كثيراً على صحة الإنسان.
So I think it's time for a new goal for humanity, adding years to life and life to years.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الفريق سمو الشيخ سيف بن زايد آل نهيان، نائب رئيس مجلس الوزراء، وزير الداخلية، سمو الشيوخ، أصحاب المعالي والسعادة، الضيوف الكرام، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. اسمحوا لي بداية بالتعريف عن نفسي. أخوكم محمد سالم العامري، حاصل على درجة دكتوراه في علم الوراثة اللاجينية أو الأبيجينيتكس. ستتناول محاضرة اليوم أسباب الشيخوخة وكيفية تفاديها مع بروفيسور ومدير مركز بولف جلين لبيولوجيا أبحاث الشيخوخة في كلية الطب في جامعة هارفارد، كاتب كتاب Lifespan Why We Age and Why We Don't Have to، البروفيسور ديفيد سنكلير. ونلفت عنايتكم إلى أن المحاضرة ستكون باللغة الإنجليزية، وبإمكانكم استخدام سماعات لمتابعة الترجمة الفورية. واسمحوا لي الآن أن نكمل حديثي باللغة الإنجليزية. Your Highnesses, Excellencies, honored guests, we may be about to witness a significant and unpredictable biological transformation that surpasses anything humanity has ever experienced in the past. The UAE has been making significant strides in the field of biological advancements in recent years, positioning itself as a hub for innovation and discovery in life sciences, not only in the region, but beyond. It brings me great pride that one of the key drivers of this progress has been the launch of the Emirati Genome Project, which aims to map the genetic makeup of the Emirati population and use that information to improve their healthcare outcomes. Which brings us here today to discuss the biological challenges facing humanity in the future. So please, allow me to introduce my guest tonight, a renowned biologist specializing in the research of aging, professor in the Department of Genetics, and co-director of the Paul F. Glenn Center for Biology of Aging Research at Harvard Medical School. He has been named by Times Magazine as one of the 100 most influential people in the world and top 50 most influential people in healthcare. Author of the book, Lifespan, Why We Age and Why We Don't Have to, which has been sold over 1 million copies around the world. Professor David Sinclair. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you, Muhammad. Your Highnesses, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great honor to be here today to talk about a great advancement that has happened in the labs around the world, including my own lab, and I appreciate the chance to tell you about my latest discoveries here today and the implications that they have for the future of the UAE and the entire planet. And I want to commend the UAE for being a center for learning, the advancement of technology, and a role model for other nations around the globe. So I stand here today after starting a research lab in Boston, at Harvard University in Boston, about 30 years ago. I'm now 85 years old. Not true, but I am turning 54 soon. And like most of us, if we just look at today's medicine, someone my age has much fewer days ahead than behind them. And these days ahead do not look very bright for someone in their 50s, and certainly for someone in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. Today, we live in a world where reaching the age of 80 or 90, and certainly 100, is an example of disability and suffering and disease. I'm here to tell you that I have no doubt, based on what I have seen in my lab and in companies now emerging around the planet, that soon, certainly within the next decade, that we will start to see changes in what we can achieve in our lifetimes, so that a 70-year-old will no longer have to worry about heart disease and cancer and dementia. An 80-year-old can look forward to beginning a new life, and instead of worrying about the legacy, can think about raising the great-grandkids and contributing to society. And then even somebody in their 90s can look forward to many decades ahead. That future is a certainty. And the longer I live and the more research that I see and the results that are coming out from not just my group of 20 scientists at Harvard, but around the world, including here in the UAE, tells us that this change in medicine is coming. It's really no longer an if, it's really a question of when. And the faster we go in terms of development of technology. We were visiting G42 and the Emirati Genome Project folks today and yesterday. And what I know is that through the development of genomic technology, which the UAE is very advanced in, I would say probably the leading country in the world in genetics, but also advancements in artificial intelligence and the ability to read the structures of the cell in atomic detail, that these combined technologies will advance medicine so fast that none of us in this room can imagine what life will be like in the near future. I'm also here to tell you that there's been a really remarkable discovery made by one of my students, actually, Wan Cheng Lu. He's now 30 years old, and when he was about 27, he made what I think is one of the most remarkable discoveries of a lifetime. What he discovered, as I'll tell you today, is that there is a backup copy of youth in every cell in our bodies. What does this mean for us? It means that if you see somebody who's old and frail and sick, you should not think of them as old. You should look at them as though they have a corrupted software that needs to be reinstalled. And in my lab, we are learning now how to do that. In rodents, in mice, we do this. We are now learning to do this in non-human primates, monkeys. And the next step, in the next 2 years, if all goes well, we will treat our first patient for age reversal and cure an incurable disease. In this case, it will be blindness. These are things that we didn't even imagine could be possible just 5 years ago. So in my book, if you have read it, you will know that I liken this time in medicine to similar to the birth of human flight. And the reason I say that is that once the Wright brothers took off, the world was never going to be the same again. And this discovery that our bodies contain a backup copy of youth is the same type of discovery. The world can never be the same again now that we know that you can reboot, restart the body, and restore its function. So what happened after the Wright brothers? This was about 120 years ago. And after they made this discovery, it only took 65 years before humanity made it to the moon. Only 65 years from off the ground to the moon. What's remarkable about that is that 65 years is a long time in today's technology. We are moving so quickly in biology that even 5 years ago is ancient history. What used to take $2 billion and years of work to sequence one person's DNA, my students can do this for $200 in a few days on a machine not the size of a building, but the size of a chocolate, a small bar of chocolate, and it's only getting more impressive. So going to the moon, I don't think that's anywhere near as close to an advancement as what we're going to see in the revolution in biology. The 21st century is the century where we learn to control ourselves. Now, for most of human history, we have thought of aging as something different from diseases. I believe that this is the wrong way to look at aging. We now know that aging is up to 90% the cause of diseases that cause most of the suffering and deaths every day. Across the world, 150,000 people die every day from the aging process. Now, we've classified the products of aging, we give them different names. If your brain gets old, we call it dementia. If your arteries get old, we call it heart disease. If your pancreas and your muscles get old, we call that diabetes, high blood sugar. But these are all manifestations of the same process, the aging process. It happens the same way, we believe, in every cell in the body. So don't look at diseases like separate things to treat with separate medicines. The way to look at it is that we can develop medicines that can be given to a patient to revive their memory, but it will also revive their entire body. And that diseases that are incurable today, like Alzheimer's disease, I believe will soon be curable. In my lab, it's very easy to cure Alzheimer's in animals. All we do is we make the brain young again. So I think this is a better way to look at it, is that diseases are part of aging and that we should study aging like a disease. In fact, I've argued across the planet and in my book that it would be helpful if we declare aging a medical condition that doctors should treat. Because if we wait till the end stages when we're sick, it's often too late. We should be treated early for this condition that we will all get if we live long enough. So what causes aging? I'll tell you what we've discovered in my lab. We believe that we've uncovered a major cause of aging, which includes the shortening of telomeres and other issues that go wrong in the body. It's a breakthrough in the sense that it's a different way of thinking about why we get old. Now, the original concept that's been around for at least 100 years is that the body just gets worn out and accumulates garbage or trash, and there's not much you can do about it. Aging is just one way. But what we've discovered, in part by studying twins, so this is a man in Sweden, and his identical twin looks like this. His identical twin not just looks younger, but is literally younger than the identical twin. So what this means is that people with the same DNA can have different ages. What's going on? This doesn't make a lot of sense, right? We think that DNA is our destiny, and this controls our age. But we're missing a key component, and that's what I want to tell you about today. So if there's one thing that you remember today, it's that aging is a disease, and that my lab is working on a cure for that disease. Now, does this mean we're going to be immortal? No, not yet. But I can say that the idea of getting old and sick when you're 80 or 90 will soon be history. So let me tell you why I think we get old. Aging is simply a loss of information. It's not just damage or junk accumulating. It's as though the software of the body gets corrupted. And if I'm right, you can restore youth in an old person. So before I tell you about the biology, let me give you a similar example. For the young people in the audience, these things were called compact discs. We used to put music on them. It was great. We could store about 20 songs. I like this analogy because the music that's on the compact disc is digital information. It's very good at preserving information. Similar to the genome, the DNA in our bodies is digital. It's not zeros and ones, but it's A, T, C, G in chemical form, written 1 billion times end to end. What I'm saying aging really is, it's not a loss of the digital information, it's the inability to read that information. Similar to scratches on a compact disc, so you cannot read the music. But you can polish the CD, you can get rid of the scratches, and when we do that, we should be able to reverse aging because the cells can now read the information in the DNA again. So this is some biology. You might remember some of it from school. The DNA molecule that has the digital code is the blue chemical in this drawing, and that's the genome. This is what the Genome Project here is reading millions of times per day. That is the code that you get from your parents. But as I showed you, that's not all there is to health. In fact, 80 to 90% of your future health is not in your DNA. It's this other form of information that is controlled by how you live your life, by what you eat, how you sleep, whether you exercise, do you drink, do you smoke, are you relaxed, do you meditate, do you fast? These things impact the other type of information, the epigenome. And the epigenome is a new type of science that's exploding in biology. And we're getting better now at reading this epigenome, just like we could read the genome. And what the epigenome is are the structures that tell the cell which gene to read. So in the brain, a nerve cell will read a different set of genes to make a nerve cell, and in the liver, a liver cell will read a different set of genes. That's what the epigenome is. And that set of instructions is laid down when we're still in our mothers, and then we're born a mixture of thousands of different types of cells, all with the same DNA, but different epigenomes and different music that they play. And what I'm saying to you, our discovery is that the music is still there, but the cell over time plays the wrong notes because the epigenomic information is corrupted. And we just recently published why we think the epigenomic information gets corrupted, what causes the scratches. The other thing I want you to know before I tell you that result is that we can read the epigenome in various ways. The easiest way to read the epigenome is you can look at chemicals that are on the DNA that accumulate as we get older, and we can use that as a clock. And this is an example, or at least a representation of how these clocks work. So I could take each of your cells, I could take a cheek swab or a blood sample, take it back to my lab, and in just a couple of days, I could tell you if you're biologically older or younger than your chronological age. And some people age faster, and some people age slower, even if they have the same DNA. And again, how you live your life impacts the rate of that aging process. And you can age slower or faster depending on your decisions in life. What's also known is if your biological age is older, you will probably die earlier, and vice versa. And I believe in the future, your doctor will not just measure your DNA, but will also measure your epigenome to understand how fast you're aging, and then give you a medicine to slow down and even reverse that process. This is an example of the results that we just published this year in the journal Cell, one of the premier scientific journals in the world. It was a 13-year study with 64 scientists involved. And we asked a very simple question. If you scratch the CD, what happens? Now, of course, we didn't scratch a CD. We corrupted the epigenome of an animal, in this case, a mouse. And if we're right, the mouse should get old. And as you can see in this picture, that's exactly what happened. We corrupted the software of an animal, and it became old. And you might say, well, that's not much use. And it's true. It's not much use, except that we can speed up experiments on aging here. But then we did something even more interesting. We found a way to reboot the system and reverse that process with the idea that there's a backup copy of the software. Now, this is my most complex slide, and it's important because it's going to introduce two topics to you. Now, what you see in this diagram is that fasting has an impact on the body, in part because it raises the levels of a particular molecule in the body called NAD. NAD is found in every cell. We need it for life. If we don't have NAD, we would be dead in about 30 seconds. That's what cyanide does. It blocks that. And NAD levels control the activity of a protective protein in the body that I co-discovered now about 25 years ago, called SIRT1 or SIRT1, which is shown in that green star. And SIRT1 is one of 7 enzymes that protects the body against diseases. And people who have naturally high levels of SIRT1 or high levels of this NAD molecule tend to be healthier for longer. And what we think SIRT1 does in large part is that it protects the software of the body. It maintains the beautiful music of the cells, and it slows down the scratches. So first of all, I'll tell you about how to raise NAD and what happens in animals and in humans. And I'll also later talk about the age reversal process. So one way to raise NAD levels is to ingest, swallow, or inject a precursor to NAD. And there are a few of them. The one that I'm showing you is called nicotinamide mononucleotide, also known as NMN. Do not confuse NMN with M&Ms. That will not make you live longer, I promise. So NMN is now a global phenomenon based on our discovery that raising the levels of NAD extends the lifespan of many species. But the question has been, if you raise NAD levels up in a human, what happens? And I can now tell you the results of those experiments that were done at Harvard. This molecule can be taken safely just as a supplement. We're also developing similar molecules as drugs to treat diseases like diabetes and Alzheimer's. This was a study, let me see if I can make him move. You see, this is an example of the subjects in the study where we looked at the effects of NAD supplementation on older people. And if we were right, people should get fitter and healthier, stronger, better memory. And we're starting to see that now in clinical studies. There are now at least 3 studies that have shown that when you take NMN, you have lower cholesterol, lower blood pressure, you're stronger and fitter, you can walk faster if you're older. And there are at least a dozen clinical trials around the world looking at other aspects such as kidney function and even protection from COVID. And I'm aware of a study here in the UAE as well that I'm very excited about. So that's one example of activating the body's defenses against aging. The super exciting result that we published, first of all, in 2020, and we were on the cover of Nature magazine with that discovery, is how to reboot the system. And what we need to do in that experiment is to tell the cell to read the genes again like the cell was young. And that sounds crazy, right? How would a cell remember what it did last week, let alone 20 years ago? But it's true. You can tell a cell to behave like it did 20 years ago. There's a memory. We call this partial epigenetic reprogramming or rebooting the body. Now, this epigenome, when it gets all tangled, so the DNA doesn't nicely bundle. And so what we were asking the cell to do is to take the mess of tangled DNA and wrap it nicely again. And the good news for all of us is that it worked. We could reset the epigenome. So how did we do that? The trick was to find genes that are only turned on in very young people, or babies and embryos inside the mother, that are switched off when we become adults. And there are a set of genes that control this process, that keep the baby young, that adults like us do not have anymore. Well, we have them, but they're not switched on. So we developed a system to turn on these baby genes again, to ask, could we make our bodies behave like a baby again? to repair and heal. Our work rested on the shoulders of a giant in medicine, the winner of the Nobel Prize in 2016, a Japanese professor, Shinya Yamanaka. Now, Yamanaka is one of the most famous scientists in the world because he discovered that 4 genes from embryos can be put into an old cell, a skin cell, for example, and make it into a stem cell that can be used to make any other type of cell. And this technology, called reprogramming, has been used and is being used to grow new tissues and to make organs in the dish. The problem with this is that if I made you into a giant stem cell, you would be the world's biggest cancer. So that's not going to make you, well, it's going to make you younger, but it's also going to kill you. And it was known about 10 years ago that if you turn on all of these 4 genes at once in a mouse, it will die within 2 days. I don't recommend that. That's not going to help humanity. Remember this student I told you about called, his name is Wencheng Lu. He tried for 3 years to find gene combinations that reversed the age of a human cell, skin cell, but did not cause cancer. And he came into my office in 2017 and said, "David, I want to quit. I cannot do this anymore. I've tried everything." And my job as a professor is to stop students from quitting. That's my main job. And it's often quite a difficult job. So I had to convince Wencheng that he should keep going. It's worth the fight. And we came up with an experiment that now has made him famous. And that is to use not 4 of these Yamanaka genes, but only 3 of them, the 3 safe ones, and leave off one of the genes that causes cancer, called MYC, which in this slide is the M. So our technology uses the 3 genes, OCT4, SOX2, and KLF4, which we call O, S, and K for short, OSK. When we put this into an animal, and now we've put it into monkeys, it's extremely safe. You don't get cancer. What we do see, though, is that cells go back in age by about 75% and then stop. They don't keep going. We don't understand exactly how it works. In fact, we don't even know where the information is that we are rebooting. We have an idea, but we don't know for sure. We just know that it works. And the first experiment was this one. We damaged the optic nerve of a mouse, and that causes blindness. And that's what's shown here. This orange line is dead nerves because it's not glowing. Now, when we reprogrammed the optic nerves, look what happened. They stayed alive, and in fact, they grew back again. You all know that if you damage nerves in the spine or in the eye, you don't grow again. Here, we can rejuvenate the vision and get the vision back again. So that was the first experiment. The next experiment was to treat glaucoma. Oh, this was a highlight. So Nature magazine, which is one of the top magazines of science in the world, is normally very conservative. But I was shocked that they put this on their cover, Turning Back Time. Of course, I was very happy that we got the cover. But to me, that was revealing that even the conservative scientific community was finally ready for age reversal. So glaucoma, very prevalent around the world, one of the leading causes of blindness. Here in the UAE, it's a terrible problem, particularly with metabolic diseases like diabetes. And there's nothing you can do to reverse blindness right now. The good news is when we take an animal like a mouse or even a monkey and we give it this disease, we get improvements. In fact, in the mouse study, we could totally restore vision of those mice. And we are now in discussions with leading institutions here in the hopes that we can work together my company and my lab with the UAE to make the UAE a leading center for curing blindness and a leading center for the future of age reversal as a medical treatment. Now, we've gone further than vision in my lab. We can now grow human brains in the lab. What you're seeing on the screen on the left are human brains that we grow from stem cells. And we're the only lab in the world currently that can age these tissues. We can make these little brains 80 years old in a matter of 2 weeks. So we can study Alzheimer's disease and dementia in these little human brains. And then the good news is we can reverse that. Then we take this gene therapy and we've given it to mice, old mice that have forgotten things. And the remarkable thing we just discovered is that those forgotten memories, they come back. The mice remember what they forgot, which means that old people still have the memory, they just can't retrieve the memories. And I believe when we reverse the age of their brains, they will be able to learn and remember things again. So I wanted to give you some takeaways because rejuvenation of the human body is coming. It will start with the eye, then we plan to move to curing hearing loss, then dementia, and we've now done muscle and kidney rejuvenation as well. So what we need to do, all of us, including our parents and grandparents if they're still with us, is to stay alive for as long as possible until this technology arrives. Because when it comes, it will be a game changer for how we treat diseases currently. So what are the best ways to slow aging? Let me tell you a few ways that we can do it. So it has not escaped my attention that this is Ramadan. We're in Ramadan right now, and the practice of fasting, I've been telling most of the world that it is one of the best ways to slow aging. Just think how many of you feel better after a month of fasting. The reason is, it's not just that perhaps you lost weight, it's because you've turned on your body's defenses against aging. Your bodies fight aging when you fast and when you do these things that I'll tell you about. The other thing that we discovered in my lab is that plants make chemicals that turn on the body's defenses against aging, just like fasting does. They turn on the NAD production, and they also turn on the SIRT1 protection, and they stabilize the epigenome. Plants, when they are stressed, make xenohermetic molecules. And you can find these molecules, for example, in olive oil and in very colorful vegetables. When plants experience trouble, adversity, they make these survival molecules that when we eat them, we sense that there's a danger and our bodies fight against aging and disease. So here's one other take-home lesson. You want to put your body in adversity mode. Not too much, you don't want to hurt yourself, but today's lifestyle is too easy, right? Even our suitcases have wheels on them. This is a problem because it tells our body, don't bother fighting aging. Everything's great. Lots of food. We don't need to run. It's all good. We don't even experience a lot of temperature changes anymore. So we need to go back to how we used to live. So what I recommend is not to eat 3 big meals a day because the body gets used to it, thinks that it doesn't need to survive. Exercise and stretch. The reason exercise works is because it makes the body fight against aging. It turns on these protective SIRT1 longevity genes. And 3 bouts or 3 days a week of 15 minutes of losing your breath is known to be sufficient to reduce cardiovascular disease by as much as 35%. So a little bit goes a long way. As I mentioned, you want to eat plants that are colorful and exposed to adversity. And what's very important, which is not typically done in most countries, though the UAE is the leader, is you want to measure things, because if you don't measure things, you're blind. You're blind. We cannot drive a car without a dashboard. We cannot drive a car with our eyes closed. So why do we practice medicine this way? It makes no sense. And so by measuring myself, I've been able to optimize my own body, which I'll show you in a minute. And there are supplements that I'll tell you about that I take that maybe you would like to consider. And these supplements have been discovered in my lab and other labs to activate the body's defenses against aging. So if there's a few things you can do immediately, sugar is a real problem. Sugar will stick, especially glucose, sugar will stick to your proteins, it will bind to your blood proteins, and it's toxic. It causes type 2 diabetes, but it also causes a lot of other diseases. And I think that avoiding a lot of sugar is one of the best things you can do for your children and for yourself. Mediterranean diet, we know that it's healthy, okay? So eat a lot more plants than meat. Avoid red meat if you can. It doesn't hurt if you eat it occasionally. You don't want to eat a lot of protein as well, especially animal protein. The reason is that if the body has a lot of protein, it may grow fast and you will get muscle slightly quicker, but it will not fight aging. So that's why fasting is good. The body will feel the lack of protein and fight aging. Try not to snack. Let your body rest from food. And if you feel like you need to drink or eat something, have a tea, have a coffee. That's okay. Always be active. Move. I mean, you can see I'm moving all the time. I try to. Sitting is as bad as smoking for longevity. So you could get a standing desk if you need to work, walk a little, go upstairs if you can. And maintain your muscle mass, especially for men. We lose about 1% of our muscle mass every year over the age of 40. So I try to eat one main meal a day. I'm not always successful when I'm traveling, for sure. My goal is to try to put most of my calories into 6 or so hours per day and not always be nibbling on food. Importantly, if you try to do everything I do tomorrow, you will fail, I believe. You need to change things slowly. So try to eat a small breakfast or skip lunch or try to walk more. These small changes will eventually compound and you can get up to 15 years of extra life just by doing these simple things. Now, supplementation. I'm asked this question every day. David, what do you take? What should I take? Just give me the pill. That's all I want. I don't want to fast. I don't want to run. I want to just take a pill. So I'm not saying that these pills will replace exercise and fasting, but I can tell you that I believe they work in addition to these health benefits or these lifestyles. NED boosters, I talked about NMN. There are other ones such as NR. There's one that's being studied here in the UAE called NAR. My brother is working on this compound in collaboration with the UAE. I take 1,000 milligrams of NMN every day in the morning. Berberine and metformin are two molecules that either separately or together work to lower blood sugar levels, which, as I mentioned, is very important for longevity. And so I take 1,000 milligrams of metformin most days of the week. This is a drug that you get from doctors for type 2 diabetes, but it's also increasingly thought to protect against other diseases. So resveratrol and fisetin are chemical compounds from plants that are stressed. Resveratrol you find in grapes, fisetin is found in other plants that are stressed. And so I take usually between 0.5 gram and 1 gram of these chemicals as well in the morning. Spermidine is a very interesting molecule. You can find it in every type of cell, including plants, and you can buy it as a supplement. And it's been shown to extend the lifespan of many different animals, and probably it works by stabilizing the epigenome. Vitamin D3 and K2. these are very important, of course, in places where we avoid the sun or we cannot get enough sunlight. K2 is not very well known. Vitamin K2 will protect your cardiovascular system from calcium deposits and put the calcium into your bones rather than your arteries. And usually those supplements come together in the same pill. So I take that. I make sure my B vitamins are maintained at the right level. I measure them. You don't want too high or too low. And alpha lipoic acid, I did my PhD on this molecule coincidentally, and it is a molecule that is very good for the energy in cells. And finally, the fish oils, those are very important for inflammation. And it turns out one of these molecules activates SIRT1, and maybe that's why these are good for health. So this is the basics of what I do, and my father does every day, including try to exercise and don't eat too much. So how old am I? Well, you can measure it. I've been taking tests for my age for over a decade, and every year over the past decade, I've been getting younger, according to this test. And actually, it might be right. If you look at my old photos, I think I look older than I do now. You can be the judge. But you can see in this graph here, where I sit is here, the youngest of about 10,000 people that have been measured my age. So I'm telling you, science works. If you measure, change, you can go back, like I did, biologically by at least a decade. So I mentioned my father. My father is now 83. This was one year in his life before COVID, the pandemic. At 80, he was as active as he was when he was 30 and feels just as fit and healthy. He still has no diseases. He doesn't even wear glasses to drive a car at night. And so my hope is that my father can serve as a shining example of what humanity can achieve, which is that in your 80s you can begin a new career, you can be productive, you can learn a new instrument, a new language, and look forward to another 30 years of life. Take-home message today. Aging truly is reversible. This disease that we all have, we can slow it down, and we can even reverse it. And in the future, when this happens, we will wonder why we didn't do it before. Why did we ignore aging until now? So I think hopefully I've inspired you to work on your health and stay alive until the radical new technologies arrive, which is very soon. And I want to thank you very much. I want to thank all of you for coming today and the great honor to present my work here today. Thank you very much.
Professor, it was an honor and a pleasure to hear your thoughts about aging and longevity. Hopefully, this will lead to a better tomorrow. تناولت محاضرة اليوم أهمية النظر إلى الشيخوخة على أنها حالة طبية قابلة للعلاج، وكيف تؤثر الساعة اللاجينية على مرحلة الشيخوخة، وما هي الطرق التي تساعد على التحكم في عملية الشيخوخة، وكيف سيؤثر علاج الشيخوخة مستقبلا على القطاع الصحي والاقتصادي. أود أن أشكر صاحب السمو الشيخ محمد بن زايد آل نهيان رئيس الدولة للتكرم في استضافتنا في مجلسه الموقر، وللبروفيسور ديفيد سنكلير لتزويدنا بهذه المعلومات القيمة، وكذلك المتحدثين والحضور الكرام. في الختام أود أن أدعو الفريق سمو الشيخ سيف بن زايد آل نهيان والمشاركين في فقرة الفيديو للصعود على المنصة لأخذ صورة جماعية. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.